We're going to be talking about one of my favorite parts of class, and that's HTML coding. So we're going to start getting into creating web pages with HTML. Now I like to talk about content before we get into looks, and HTML is basically your content, your text that you're going to see on the web page. Now there is some coding involved in HTML, and that's where the browser interprets that code that you write and knows how to display it. Now there are two basic parts that we're going to be talking about involved with the web page. One is HTML, and then later on we'll get into CSS. And CSS is more the design and layout of the page. It makes the page look pretty. It takes the content and makes it look pretty. And we'll be learning version 5 of HTML. Of course, HTML started out with version 1, and since then it's progressed to version 5. It's basically just new features, new things that you can write, new code that you can write in HTML that the browser will understand. And one good example of this is in HTML1, if you wanted to add a video or audio or some type of multimedia, it was really hard and cumbersome to add that code and get it to work. With 5, it's a simple tag that you can write and it embeds audio and video, and the browser knows how to display that. So that's a good thing. And we'll also talk about different ways that you can edit HTML code. Now we're going to be using a basic editor, and we'll use TextEdit that's on the Mac. If you're on a PC, you can use Notepad or any basic text editor that you have. And there are different editors. This is kind of the basic that you can get. There's also Dreamweaver, more advanced, made by Adobe. And some of those editors, they're more visual, which means you can click a button and it does the code behind the scenes for you. But I like to give people an understanding of what the code actually is and what it does before you jump to one of those other tools. There's also content management systems, or CMSs, like WordPress that takes it another level and allows you to give you another visual editor inside that just allows you to click buttons and it does all the code for you. So like I said, we'll be using TextEdit, and there's a couple of things you have to do to TextEdit before it'll display HTML for you. So if you open up TextEdit and you go up to the TextEdit menu at the top in your menu bar, go to Preferences, you want to make sure that the format is set to plain text, and under the Open Save tab you want to make sure it's set to display HTML files as HTML code. And what that'll do is it'll allow you to open and close your document and not have to worry about it messing up the file format for you. So we'll close our Preferences menu and we'll get started in writing HTML code. So I use the word tags sometimes when I'm talking about code, and basically that's what a tag looks like. And anytime with HTML, if you have an opening tag, you have to have a closing tag. Now this right now is telling our browser, hey, this file is an HTML file. Nothing hard here. So if I'm opening a tag, I need to close a tag. And to close a tag, all you simply do is write the angle bracket and HTML to close it. And so right now, anything in between these two tags is an HTML document. And there's a body tag. Like I said, if you open it, you got to close it. And the browser is pretty much telling the browser anything between this body tag you need to display in the web page. So if I type my first web page, whether this is your first web page or not, and now I'm going to save it. Now, what you have to do here is we'll call it index.html. Now, index is a good name to use because by default, if you just type in a web address, like I was going to type in veritas.com, the web server would automatically pick up the first page that it found called index. And so I always like to just call my test pages index and create a folder for your site, because it's helpful to keep everything inside that one folder instead of having stuff all over the place and not being able to find anything. So I created a folder called Veritas. You can call it whatever you want, but we'll just name our file index.html. Now you can't have any special characters in the name of a web page, so you don't want periods or anything crazy. You want to keep it lowercase, keep the file names easy to read, and we'll save that in our Veritas folder. And it'll probably say, are you sure you want to use HTML? We'll click use HTML, And now we have a web page. Now we notice that it changed our icon to a Chrome icon, which basically says that since it's a .html page now, it's going to open in Chrome. So if I go back to my folder and double click on my index file, we see that it opens up our first web page and it's displaying it. So now you say, well, how do I get back into my file? You just right click on it, you can go to open with, text edit, or you can open text edit and go to file, open, and then choose that document. So we come back to our first web page. Now we have our first web page, and I'm going to add a link to this lesson that'll walk you through some of the basic commands or basic tags that you can use in HTML. One of them is an unordered list, and this is basically what an unordered list code looks like. There again, we have to do our open and closing tags. Now if I close that, it's basically going to give us a bulleted list. Now when I'm working on HTML, I usually have a couple of windows open. I'll just keep this window open, and then I'll have this window. Now I've saved this. Now if I go over here and just refresh, we can see my first item is there. And we can do a better job here of... So right now we have first item. Now let's say I want a second item. Second item. Save it. Click on my window, refresh. My second item shows up. Nothing hard, very simple. This is our basic code that we're writing here. We'll start adding things up here in the HTML, and we'll talk about what those things are, but right now we've basically made our first web page. Now let's say I want this to be my navigation. So we're going to add a link to this. First what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this type a little smaller so that we can fit our code in one line. So let's say I'm going to add a link tag. And to add a link tag, it's basically what we call an href. So href, and let's say we're going to do a link to the Apple website. And so that's my start of my tag for my link. It's basically saying, A, this is going to be a link. Href, where are you linking to? And then what do I want the text to say inside of my link? And remember, if we open it, we got to close it. So I'll click after and close my A tag. Now if I save it, I go over here, it should make it blue and underline it. And we see that my page does not work. And we'll come back to see what's wrong with my tag there. So that's basically a link tag. It's saying, hey, there's a link coming. Where does this link to? Here's the text to display. And then I'm going to close my link. There are also things called headings inside of HTML. And headings, sometimes people use headings for design, but we really use headings to show different sections on a web page. So a heading tag would be H1. That's saying this is the most important thing on a page, and if we open it, we got to close it. H1. Now if I save that and refresh here, I see that it made that text large because it's an H1. Now if I go down here and make an H2 and say first section, close my H2 tag, save it, click over here and refresh. You see how the H2 tag is smaller than the H1 tag. So already you've created a web page, you've created a heading one, you've created an unordered list, and this is the standard way that people make navigation lists. Just do unordered lists. And we've made a link tag. So from there already you could make a pretty complete web page. And this is what web pages look like back in the mid to late 90s. They may add some colors and some images, but this was basically it. This is what you got. So if we go look at a web page, and we'll go to apple.com. And everything's fancy, right? If you've seen the Apple web page, there are videos. Now, if I right click on the Apple web page and go to view page source, we see all of the HTML. Now they have a few things that we didn't add, but basically there's an HTML tag. And if we scroll down, there's a body tag. And if we scroll down, all of this stuff here is what we'll be learning to some extent. I mean, I'm not going to teach you how to make Apple's website, but there's some LIs. And we see links. There's a link to the music page. Ahrefs. So we see there that you have the starts of a website. Now I'll be sharing your assignment with you, but it also have a website that links to and teaches you some of the different HTML code that you have access to inside of HTML. And really just open that page up, open that test page up and play around with the code, save it, and refresh your browser. And see how far advanced you can get for the next lesson. Now, next lesson we'll talk about linking internally to different pages so that you can have multi-pages, and we'll also talk about embedding images and that sort of thing. So I hope you learned a little bit of your HTML here, and we'll talk next week.